Over the past few months, I've gotten more comments than usual asking which camera and lens I use to record my videos. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that's also the same time frame that I've been using the Sigma 24mm 1.4 Art Series lens. So here's my review for the Sigma 24mm 1.4 and why I think it's one of the best prime lenses you can get. This video is not sponsored in any way, but some of you might know that I'm a high school digital media teacher. And so about a year ago, I ordered one of these lenses for my program at school, and like immediately, my students and I were really blown away by the image quality we were getting when using the Sigma lens. We also got the 18-35, which is also an amazing lens for crop sensor cameras. And I did a comparison video last year of the Canon 70-200 and Sigma 70-200 2.8 lenses. So even though I really like Canon lenses, Sigma is one of the few third-party manufacturers that I actually trust. And so after being impressed with this lens at work, last December I found a holiday sale where it was available for a pretty good price, and I decided to get one for myself. And since that time, last December, it pretty much hasn't left my camera, which is the Canon 6D Mark II. It's my favorite camera of all time. I've found that 24mm is a really great, useful focal length. For a long time, I was stuck at 35, which I do still really love because it just looks so visually appealing, and it is, you know, for lack of a better term, very cinematic. But for the kind of videos I make and stuff like this, where I'm framed sitting at a desk or showing something and talking about things, or, you know, going outside and doing like a vlog style video, 24mm is a great focal length. It's not too fisheye, but it's not too zoomed in. When deciding whether or not I wanted to get this lens for myself, a good question was that I already have the Canon 24-105, which I really do feel is one of the best all-around general purpose lenses that you can get. It's just does a lot and it's super versatile. So if this lens, 24-105, covers 24mm, why do I need a separate 24mm lens? Wouldn't it make sense just to set this at its widest setting and get the same results? The difference is that this is an f4 lens, while the Sigma has a maximum aperture of 1.4, and that makes a world of difference. And so just for reference, here is a side-by-side comparison with the Canon 24-105 and the Sigma 24mm, both lenses at 24mm. And what you should notice right off the bat is that the shot, the framing, is pretty much the same, but the image quality is gonna change quite a bit. Right now, each lens is at f4, which is the 24-105's maximum aperture. In order to maintain this exposure, I have to increase my ISO to 1600, which is much higher than I would normally like to shoot. And even though the shots in terms of framing look the same, what you'll notice is that as I adjust the aperture on the Sigma, I can lower the ISO, which reduces noise. I can usually shoot at about 200 ISO in this room, but you're also gonna notice the depth of field becoming much more shallow. My face should stay clear, I should stay in focus, and the background should get a lot blurrier. And as I open up the Sigma lens all the way to f1.4, you should notice a little bit of a difference in exposure and image quality. I'm now at 200 ISO, and the background should be much more blurred than the Canon 24-105 at f4, and that's really a look that I like to go for. And obviously, there's nothing wrong with using an f4 lens. They're terrific. I have several of them, but when filming indoors, personally, a look that I really like is that very shallow depth of field at a low ISO, and having a lens with a very wide aperture helps me to make that happen. When I film videos in this room, my camera is usually mounted on a tripod that's about like 3-ish feet away from me. And at f1.4, it does a great job of giving a nice blurry background while keeping me in focus. But f1.4 is a really shallow depth of field, so it can actually sometimes be difficult to keep your subject in focus, especially when filming video. But that's why I personally do prefer Canon cameras, because their dual pixel autofocus is so good and so reliable. It's not perfect, but wow, it's really, really good. And so if I set face tracking on with my camera, it can usually just lock on to me, and then whatever I'm doing, and as I'm moving further and away from the camera, it can just keep me in focus and maintain that super shallow depth of field, which I just love the look of. And it also really helps because having a wider aperture makes it easier to shoot in lower light conditions. And even though I do have a few video lights set up in here, it's actually not crazy bright, but more importantly, what I really like is knowing when I take this lens and go out of the room and into the world, that I'm gonna be more able to deal with low light situations, which you really do encounter all the time when you're filming outside of a controlled environment. One of the other reasons that I chose this lens specifically is that it has a 77mm filter diameter, which means since I do have the 24-105 and I have the f4 16-35 Canon lens, that all of my existing filters will work on this lens. So it's very easy to take an ND filter and put it on this lens and put it on this lens, and I don't have to have all these different filter sizes and things happening. And having an ND filter is really important for this lens. I made a whole video about how ND filters can help save your footage and really give you some cool options that you don't have otherwise. But one of my favorite things to do with this lens is to put an ND filter on it and then go film outside at a really shallow depth of field. So I live in the California desert where it's bright and hot most of the time. So being able to go outside in the middle of the day and film with a shutter speed of 50 at an aperture of 1.4 is amazing. You can get this super shallow depth of field and really pull your subject from the background even in the brightest conditions. I honestly don't have any real negative criticism about this lens. I think it's fantastic. The price seems a little bit high. It usually retails for about $800, although sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, you can get it on sale depending on the time of year. But that's a really good investment for a lens that you can keep for years and years. And you know, I've had mine for several months now and it works great. I've taken it all over the place, but I've also had the one at work which has stood up to use from high school students for over a year. So whenever I have gear that can hold up to that and still work great, then I know that it's a really high quality piece of equipment that's worth your time. Teaching a high school digital media program is like the perfect way to test which gear is good and which gear is not good. Another reason why I do like Canon cameras. One feature that I would love for this lens to have is image stabilization, but even though it doesn't, 24mm is a pretty wide focal length. And so it's easy to keep it stable. If you're using like a telephoto lens or a really long lens, then everything just gets super shaky. But this is a pretty wide lens, and so it's not too hard to keep stable. And fortunately, since Sigma does make this lens for Canon, Nikon, and Sony, some cameras actually have in-body image stabilization, like a lot of the Sonys do. And so if you get the Sony version of this lens, then you do end up with some stabilization. So it is possible to kind of have the best of both worlds. And I also know that if it were stabilized, it would probably raise the price, and that might make it way too unaffordable for some people. The one issue that I did have with this lens right away was that it was front focusing. And luckily, since I'd done a bit of research and I'd actually been looking at it for a while, I knew that this was a problem. And Sigma lenses seem to have an issue where they front or back focus. So if I locked on here, it might actually be here that was clear and in focus. And that can obviously be a little bit tough. And so while the lens looked great out of the box, it didn't seem super sharp because it was front focusing, so the stuff I was trying to focus on wasn't actually coming out clearly. Luckily, the version that I got just came with the Sigma dock, which is a really awesome tool. It's a little USB dock that you connect to your computer, and then you just connect the lens to the dock, and you can go into a Sigma app and fine-tune the lens to your specific camera, your specific preferences. There's a ton of different settings that you can adjust. And since I've done that, the image quality for both photos and videos has just been phenomenal. Like the clarity, the sharpness, the colors, this lens is magic. I absolutely love it. And like I said, this video is not sponsored in any way. I don't always make videos for every single piece of gear I own. Just every once in a while, you come across something that is an amazing tool. And this specifically, since I've started using this lens, the amount of comments that I've gotten asking what lens, what camera, have just like gone through the roof. Well, I mean, like, okay, instead of none, it's like 4, but it's more than it used to be. And I really attribute that to how great this lens looks and how wonderful it is. So I know that this wasn't the most scientific review. I didn't have my color and my focus charts, but to be honest, there are people who do that so much better than I could that there's no reason for me to even do it. And more importantly, I'm not so much interested in how a focus chart or a color chart looks on a lens. I'm interested in what it's like to put that lens on your camera and actually use it to make stuff. And I love using this lens to make stuff. So I highly recommend it. I'm gonna continue using it. I'm very interested to see how it holds up compared to a Canon L series lens. I have no reason to think that this isn't going to hold up just as well. And I'll definitely let you know if there's anything interesting that I find or pros and cons that emerge along the way. If you're looking to get this lens, even though it seems expensive at $800, it's really a good price for a high quality lens that's gonna last for a very long time. I would, however, recommend waiting until you either find it on sale or find it as part of a kit that comes with the Sigma dock. On its own, I think this dock retails for about $70, and I wouldn't want to pay $70 separately on top of a really expensive lens. So if you're worried at all about front focusing or back focusing, keep an eye out for a deal that includes this, because I think that that's going to make your life a lot easier and give you some really good peace of mind when you buy this lens. But as I mentioned at the very start of this video, I'm a big fan of Canon original products, Canon cameras, Canon lenses, and so it's very rare that I will go outside of that world, and Sigma and this lens are one of the few things that I really do enjoy, and they're great tools, and so if you're looking for one, I think you'll love it too. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.